Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Michael was sitting at the table with the kids when he heard the suitcase zipper close. Vanessa appeared in the hallway holding an airplane ticket and announced, as if it were just any decision, that she'd be traveling to the Virgin Islands with Gregory and Diane. She said she needed to clear her head, recharge, disconnect. But she didn't ask if he could take care of the kids, didn't check whether he'd have time, didn't even explain where this sudden closeness with the neighbors had come from. It was all presented as a done deal, as if he didn't even have the right to weigh in. Michael's eyes widened in disbelief. He called Vanessa crazy. Asked if she'd lost her mind, if she really thought it was normal to just leave home out of nowhere for a full week on a trip with the neighbors, and then leave him in charge of the twins like it was some kind of favor. She replied coldly, saying everything was already arranged, that she needed this time, and that he should understand. He tried to press her, asked what exactly would happen on this trip, who else would be there, if she'd forgotten they were in the middle of an important school project with the kids. She just rolled her eyes and said she needed time for herself. And that was that. She turned around, dragged her suitcase down the hallway, and left as if nothing were wrong. That night, he went back through old conversations, strange schedules, afternoon disappearances excused as work-related. Vanessa claimed last-minute meetings, blamed overwhelming workloads, but there was always a different perfume when she came back. On certain days, her makeup was more elaborate than usual, her smile emptier. The final straw came when he tried to access her shared online calendar, the one they'd used since having the twins, and realized she'd restricted his access over the past few weeks. He created another account to check. The gaps were filled with generic names and fake meetings. The air inside the house felt heavy, and for the first time, he felt like a guest in his own family. The next morning, after dropping the kids off at school, Michael stopped by work just to sign documents and talk to his boss. He explained he was dealing with a personal issue and wanted to take immediate vacation time. He was approved. Back at home, he organized everything precisely: backpacks with light clothes, documents, the kids' medications, his laptop with remote work paused, international cards, and a plan still taking shape in his mind. He didn't intend to confront her publicly, much less cause a scene. His goal was simple: discreetly follow Vanessa's trip and understand what was really going on. If she had the guts to hide things, he'd have the guts to find out. In the middle of the night, he bought the tickets. 3 seats. Same destination, with a layover in Miami. The kids woke up early, excited about the idea of traveling. He told them it would be a surprise adventure. Chloe asked if Mom knew. He replied it would be a surprise for her too. At the airport, he sat with the kids to have juice and checked the location app, the same one Vanessa had forgotten to disable months ago. The green dot showed she'd already arrived on the island. Instead of feeling calmer, he felt exposed, as if he were the one doing something wrong. He took a deep breath, focused on the kids, and repeated to himself that sometimes, following someone is the only way not to lose the person you love. After disembarking, he rented a small car and drove to the main marina. His eyes searched for clues: yachts with familiar names, American flags, anything that seemed out of place. They stayed at a simple guest house with a kitchen, and he told the kids they'd have sailing lessons with an experienced captain. That's when he met Harold. A man with sunburned skin and calloused hands, living alone on a sailboat anchored nearby. When Michael explained he was looking for something different for his kids, Harold stayed silent for a while, then simply said, "I can show you the sea. The rest is up to you." Michael accepted. He made a symbolic payment in exchange for the first few days aboard Harold's Northern Light. The kids loved the idea. They started helping with simple tasks, listening to the captain's stories, learning how to adjust sails, identify stars, and use a compass. It was as if, instinctively, everyone knew they were living something out of the ordinary. On the first night aboard the boat, Michael stayed awake watching the sea. He thought about Vanessa, but also about himself. About how many times he'd postponed plans to support her, how he'd always tried to keep the family standing. Now, it was as if each wave washed away a little of what had been hurt. Even without fully understanding how, he already felt he wouldn't be the same man who'd boarded that plane with his kids. And for the first time, that feeling carried a hint of freedom. Harold was the kind of man who said little, but every word that came out of his mouth seemed loaded with history. On the first day aboard the sailboat, Michael watched the captain's every move, trying to understand how someone could live so many years at sea, alone, with no one waiting for him on land. The kids were quickly enchanted. Chloe asked questions non-stop, and Harold, despite his rough demeanor, answered patiently. Caleb became interested in maps and the helm. Michael noticed that this routine, which at first was meant only as a distraction, was starting to become a safe space. Aboard the Northern Light, days passed simply, with chores, conversations, and comfortable silence. It was there, between maneuvers and sail adjustments, that Harold began to tell his story. He said he'd once had a daughter, Beatrice, but after the divorce, he lost everything: the house, contact with her, even the right to call on important dates. His ex-wife accused him of being absent, selfish, and a judge who barely looked at him sealed the permanent separation. Harold never had the courage to fight. He said at first he tried writing letters, but never got a response. One day, he realized he no longer knew the color of his daughter's eyes, and that hurt more than any court sentence. So he set off to sea, where nothing demanded explanations. Michael listened silently, increasingly understanding why this old man had accepted his offer so easily. They shared the same wound, even if through different paths. The next morning, Harold invited Michael to sail a bit farther from shore, saying there was a tourist spot families usually visited during certain seasons. Michael agreed. It was a chance to get off the beaten path, see something new, and maybe cross paths with Vanessa. They sailed for about an hour until reaching a cove partially hidden by rocks. Harold pointed out some boats anchored there, luxurious yachts with fancy names painted on the sides. Michael grabbed the binoculars and began observing closely. One boat immediately caught his attention. It had the name Ocean 2 painted in gold letters. It was the same name he'd seen on one of Vanessa's credit card statements weeks earlier, a large charge for premium rental, which she swore was a system error. Michael adjusted the focus. On deck, he saw Diane laughing while serving drinks. A few minutes later, Gregory appeared shirtless, hugging someone. When Vanessa showed up, everything around him seemed to vanish. She wore a printed swimsuit, her hair casually tied up, holding a glass. She looked light, comfortable, as if she belonged there. The three of them behaved with intimacy, easy smiles, suggestive glances. She leaned over Gregory, then whispered something in Diane's ear. Michael lowered the binoculars. His stomach churned. His heart raced. There it was, the confirmation he never wanted to see but always knew existed. The three of them. It wasn't just a trip with neighbors. It was a perfectly arranged triangle, where he was the last to know he'd never been part of the game. He went down to the sailboat's cabin, sat next to the helm, and stayed silent. Harold came in shortly after. He saw Michael's face and understood without a word being spoken. They sat there for a few minutes, each with their own ghosts. Then Harold said the sea only looks calm from afar. He said many men go mad not because of storms, but because of silence. Michael replied he didn't know what to do, that he had kids, that he couldn't pretend this was just another mistake. Harold simply said, then don't pretend. Build something new. That night, after putting the kids to sleep in the small shared cabin, Michael locked himself in the sailboat storage space for a few minutes. He took out his phone, connected to a shaky network, and opened the video folder. He went back to the moment he'd observed the Ocean 2. In the video, he'd recorded every gesture, every touch, every exchanged glance. Then he saved everything in an encrypted folder and set up an automatic backup to his email. He didn't yet know why he was doing this, but he felt that sooner or later, this evidence would matter. Harold's words wouldn't leave his head. It was true. Silence was killing him more than any scream. He thought about how he'd dedicated himself to the family, about the nights he'd stayed awake caring for the kids while Vanessa traveled for corporate events. He thought about the times he'd held things together so she could have freedom, how he'd believed their marriage could still be fixed. Now he understood the fix was an illusion he'd maintained alone. Later, Harold returned to the cabin with 2 cups of strong coffee. He handed one to Michael and stood there. He said he'd had the chance to bring his daughter back before she turned 15, but hesitated out of pride. And when he finally decided to look for her, she no longer wanted anything to do with him. He said the sea doesn't forgive those who delay decisions. That sometimes there's only one chance to change everything. Michael looked at the old man and felt a respect he couldn't explain. This man, with all his scars, spoke of regret with such frankness it felt like a living warning. They finished their coffee in silence. At that moment, the plan forming in Michael's mind began to take clear shape. A plan with no turning back, requiring courage and coldness. Something radical, but necessary. And this time, he wouldn't hesitate. Michael stayed awake all night, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel lost. His mind operated with clarity, as if a new kind of strength had awakened inside him. At dawn, he stepped off the sailboat and went to a small cafe at the marina. He ordered coffee, connected to the public Wi-Fi, and accessed the banking system. He studied the numbers calmly. Joint accounts, the kids' savings, stock investments, private pension reserves, and an emergency fund they'd kept. Vanessa had always left finances in his hands, which now proved to be a strategic mistake on her part. In a few hours, he emptied every account he could, transferring the funds to protected accounts in tax havens, using mechanisms he'd studied for years out of pure curiosity, never imagining he'd one day use them to protect himself from his own wife. The last account he accessed held a small amount registered in the kids' names. Michael left it untouched. That was theirs. The rest, he transferred securely. He saved all receipts and sent them to an encrypted emergency email. Then he notified his lawyer he needed to activate a family security protocol they discussed years earlier, Michael's paranoia, in case of kidnapping or contentious divorce. The lawyer was surprised but complied. Within hours, everything financial was under his exclusive control. He did it without hesitation. Vanessa could have her freedom. He would have his kids. Back on the boat, he announced his decision to Harold as if sharing a wartime secret. Harold didn't react with surprise. He said he'd noticed from day one that Michael wasn't an ordinary man. That he carried in his eyes a mix of exhaustion and conviction only true parents bear. He asked if Michael was sure about what he wanted to do. Michael replied it wasn't about wanting, but needing. The idea was simple: leave with the kids and live on the move, like sea nomads. Teach them the world directly, without cold schools, without family judgments, without the presence of someone who destroyed their home without considering the consequences. Michael didn't just want to run away. He wanted to rebuild. Within a week, they left the island. The sailboat departed with enough supplies for 2 months, new nautical charts, and an initial destination, Martinique. The kids were excited. Michael told them they'd be taking a school sabbatical year, something many parents did with young kids on educational trips. Caleb found the name interesting. Chloe started a journal. In the first days, the adjustment was intense. No constant internet, no TV, no neighbors, no school. Just the sea, the boat, and the 4 of them. Michael created a routine: lessons in the morning, nautical tasks in the afternoon, reading and games at night. He used offline digital materials, physical books, and downloaded videos. The kids found it strange at first, but adjusted quickly. They felt they were being challenged and respected at the same time. In Martinique, they docked for 5 days. Michael organized cultural visits, explored local markets, taught the kids about foreign currencies, and spoke with merchants in basic French, encouraging them to try communicating. Chloe bought a new notebook to draw landscapes. Caleb became fascinated with the cuisine and started writing down recipes. From there, they headed to Lisbon, where they stayed for 20 days. Harold knew the Portuguese coast well and secured marina spots at symbolic prices. During this stay, Michael began an online master's in education and child development. He wanted to better prepare to teach his kids, but also to build a long-term plan in case they ever had to return to land. They passed through Greek islands, along Italy's coasts, crossed the Red Sea, and reached Zanzibar. In each place, they learned something new. In Zanzibar, they participated in a volunteer project helping communities with water purification. Michael used portable filters and taught residents how to maintain the system. The kids participated actively. Harold, despite his age, carried gallons and laughed with local children. In moments like these, Michael realized this escape had become something else, an act of transformation. The old sailor, who once carried only bitter memories, now smiled with pride. The kids learned more in 6 months of travel than in 2 years of school. Geography, history, languages, solidarity, all experienced firsthand. Life at sea came with its own challenges. One night, a storm forced them to stay anchored for 2 straight days in a secluded cove. The kids were scared, but Harold taught them how to secure everything, and Michael stayed calm. They slept together in the same cabin, telling stories and making up songs to drown out the wind noise. It was in situations like this that their bond strengthened. Michael felt the kids trusted him like never before. They didn't ask about their mother. Maybe because they knew her absence wasn't something he could explain, or maybe because deep down, they sensed this moment was bigger than any memory left behind. While sailing international waters, Vanessa began to feel the weight of the choices she'd made. Days after returning from the Virgin Islands, upon realizing the house was empty and Michael had disappeared with the kids, she panicked and rushed to the bank. She tried accessing the joint accounts but was informed they'd all been closed or transferred by legal decision of the primary holder, based on a family protection plan. She contacted the accountant, who also gave no answers. She started calling mutual friends, Michael's parents, the kids' school. The responses were vague or non-existent. Desperate, she hired a lawyer and filed a complaint for parental kidnapping, claiming her ex-husband had fled the country with the kids without her consent. But it backfired. Michael had already anticipated this, legally alleging emotional and physical abandonment by his wife, presenting clear evidence that Vanessa had voluntarily traveled to another region with lovers, leaving the kids entirely under his responsibility indefinitely. He based his case on the Uniform Child Custody Jurisdiction and Enforcement Act, UCCJEA, which allows temporary custody transfer to the parent who remained with the child if the other parent voluntarily abandoned the family home or demonstrated neglect. Additionally, Michael attached screenshots, images of the Ocean 2 yacht, credit card spending records, all pointing to behavior incompatible with that of a responsible mother. With his lawyer's help, he activated an emergency jurisdiction order under Florida state law, alleging risk to the kids' emotional and physical well-being if they returned to Vanessa's care at that moment. Since they were in international waters but with legal registration in the U.S., the judge granted a provisional injunction in Michael's favor. This prevented any search warrants or bank freezes against him. The lawyer also preemptively filed for temporary international custody under the Hague Convention, which legally protects minors taken abroad by one parent in justified cases. Vanessa tried alleging parental alienation, defamation, financial abuse. She requested emergency child support, asset freezes, passport suspensions. All denied. The judge pointed out inconsistencies in her behavior and ruled that by voluntarily abandoning the home and concealing parallel relationships that could psychologically endanger the kids, she'd lost immediate custody rights. She could still reverse it, but only after demonstrating stability, commitment, and undergoing supervised psychological evaluation. And that would take months, maybe years. Isolated, with no access to resources, Vanessa sought support from Gregory, who ignored her. Diane blocked her contacts. Close friends cut ties. One even said, "She's reaping what she sowed." Her social reputation began to crumble. Messages she once received with party or lunch invitations were replaced by silence and sideways smiles in hallways. She tried justifying herself, saying Michael was controlling, that he'd exposed her, that the affair was just a reaction to years of marital coldness, but no one wanted to listen. Even her own parents, ashamed of the situation, asked her to take some time and stay off social media. By the time they'd spent a year at sea, the rhythm felt natural. Chloe had mastered basic navigation and helped Harold adjust sails with agility and confidence. Caleb cooked skillfully, learning recipes from different cultures and improvising with whatever was available in the pantry. Michael had completed half his master's and was already writing articles on alternative education for international platforms. He was invited to forums, interviews, webinars on nomadic teaching and child emotional education. Soon, he became a reference among small groups of traveling parents and independent educators. They began documenting part of the journey with short videos and photo logs on private profiles, accessible only to close friends and trusted educators. Michael strictly controlled what could or couldn't be published, protecting the kids' faces, the sailboat's name, and their exact location. He was cautious about exposure but felt genuine pride in what they were building. Still, there were moments of silence in the kids' eyes that even the sea routine couldn't hide. On symbolic dates, like Mother's Day or Vanessa's birthday, inevitable questions arose. Chloe cried discreetly one night after writing in her journal and asked if her mother had really abandoned them forever. Caleb, more reserved, said he was fine but avoided looking directly at his father on those occasions. Michael felt the impact but preferred not to sugarcoat reality. He sat with them calmly and explained that adults make decisions that hurt others, even when they think they're right. He said their mother had made difficult choices, that he'd also had to make his own, and that all of this was part of a process no one had chosen alone. He explained they weren't running away, they were protecting themselves. That sometimes, even people we deeply love can do things that hurt us. But that didn't make that person entirely bad, just human. Michael avoided painting Vanessa as a villain. He said she was going through a hard time, that she probably missed them too, but that right now, it still wasn't safe for the three of them to reunite. His words weren't spoken with anger. They were said firmly but with empathy. He wanted the kids to have clarity without feeding hatred, and with that, he managed to plant understanding instead of pain. He began proposing small symbolic tributes on days when longing hit hard. He suggested writing letters that wouldn't be sent or drawing something that reminded them of good moments with their mother. Harold, despite his roughness, quietly supported it all. Once, he gave Chloe a seashell and told her she could whisper into it whenever she wanted to say something to her mom. Caleb assembled a box with objects representing good memories, like a bracelet Vanessa had made for him years ago and an old family photo. That created a silent channel between them and the past, acknowledging the pain without being imprisoned by it. Michael knew time would do its work. He didn't want to force forgetting, just to build a strong emotional foundation so the kids wouldn't grow up with emotional gaps. At every new port, he reminded them this journey wasn't just physical, but emotional too. And even amid difficulties, he reinforced that they were together, that there was love, safety, and purpose. Slowly, questions about Vanessa became less frequent. Not out of indifference, but because the kids began accepting that life was moving forward differently. Their bond with their father deepened, and with Harold, it became almost familial. They were no longer a broken family trying to survive. They were a new family being built, with scars, but also with strong roots. One afternoon, as the four of them sat on deck eating dried fruit, Harold said this trip had saved his life. That before meeting Michael and the kids, he'd just been waiting for time to pass. That now he felt part of something truly worthwhile. Michael said he felt the same. Harold's eyes welled up, but he hid it with a joke. And in that moment, between simple words, Michael knew he'd made the right choice. Even if the whole world judged what he was doing, there was truth here. And where there's truth, there's peace. The reunion with Beatrice happened at a marina in Canada, almost by chance, but with the weight of something destined. Harold had received a letter with an address and a request to visit. He hesitated for days before telling Michael, as if afraid to stir wounds that had been quiet too long. He said his daughter lived nearby, worked in family counseling, and might be willing to see him. Michael encouraged him, without pushing. Harold went alone and returned hours later, red-eyed, saying little. The next day, Beatrice came to the sailboat. She was a confident woman, direct in speech. Seeing her father, she got emotional but kept her composure. She said she'd spent years angry, feeling abandoned, and needed a long time to accept her father had his own limitations. She explained she now understood there was pain on both sides, and that the separation was also a result of her mother's choices, who never allowed reconciliation. Beatrice hugged Harold but made it clear their bond would have to be rebuilt slowly. When she met Michael and the kids, she was surprised. Caleb explained how the helm worked. Chloe showed her a sketchbook of the places they'd visited. Beatrice watched them, listening closely to every word. After a few hours, she asked to speak with Michael. They sat on the sailboat's exterior. Beatrice asked if he was truly okay. Michael said he was better than he'd imagined. She looked him in the eyes and asked if he was sure keeping the kids away from their mother was really the fairest path. She said she understood his reasons, knew what it was like to grow up with emotional gaps, but that sometimes, the father who overprotects repeats the very mistakes he swore to fight. She told him Harold, by distancing himself, thought he was sparing his daughter pain, when in reality, he condemned her to emptiness. Michael listened silently. It felt like a punch to the gut. He spent the rest of the day turning those words over in his mind. That night, he sat at the bow of the sailboat, watching the water's reflection. He thought about his kids, how they avoided talking about Vanessa, the unsent letters, the secretly kept drawings. He also thought about his own motivations. It was true he wanted to protect them, but part of him also wanted to punish Vanessa, to show her she'd lost everything. He had to face himself. The next morning, he called Harold and told him his decision. He would take the kids to reunite with their mother. Not as a permanent return, but as a chance to rebuild something. Harold agreed, without speeches. He just placed a hand on Michael's shoulder and said that was the hardest and most beautiful thing a father could do. After discreet contact with the lawyer and a few weeks of preparation, Michael traveled with the kids to the United States. They met Vanessa at a shelter where she worked as a coordinator for vulnerable women. She looked different. Shorter hair, simple clothes, tired but calmer expression than the last time he'd seen her. When she saw Caleb and Chloe, she froze for a moment, then burst into tears. The kids also stood still. Chloe was the first to approach. Caleb followed. There were no immediate hugs. They just stood close, looking at each other, as if their eyes were checking whether they could still trust. In the following days, they had short, always mediated meetings. Vanessa explained she'd undergone psychological evaluation, started therapy, left behind the social life that once consumed her, and now dedicated her days to fixing, as much as possible, past mistakes. She said she no longer expected immediate forgiveness, just the chance to be around occasionally. The kids listened, asked little. Michael watched everything with a divided heart but sure he'd made the right decision. When they returned to the sailboat, Chloe left a note for her mom in her bag. Caleb wrote an email later. Small gestures showing the bridge, though fragile, was beginning to be built. 6 months later, during a calm crossing off New Zealand's coast, Harold died in his sleep. Michael found him in the morning, lying with his arms crossed over his chest, a faint smile on his face, and the ship's log beside him. The impact was silent but devastating. The kids cried, clinging to their father. Michael felt as if he'd lost the pillar that had supported his own rebuilding. He organized a small sea burial, with flowers, shells, and memories scattered over the water. Beatrice traveled to say goodbye. During the ceremony, she read aloud a letter Harold had left. It said he'd found in Michael the son life had denied him, that the grandchildren he never had were late gifts from fate, and that his final wish was for the Northern Light to keep sailing with purpose. Harold had also left legal instructions. He named Michael as direct heir to the sailboat and a discreet sum kept in vaults in Nova Scotia, the result of years of small investments. Michael used part of the money to renovate the boat and turn one compartment into a library and study room. With the rest, he created an educational fund in Harold's name for projects focused on nomadic education. Beatrice decided to come aboard for a while. She said she wanted to experience what her father had built and understand this life up close. Her presence brought a new balance. Conversations with Michael became more frequent, more intimate. No rush, no promises. Just two adults trying to heal their stories while offering the kids a new kind of stability. Over time, smiles became more natural, glances more complicit. Vanessa continued with her new life. She didn't try forcing reconciliation again. She let the kids set the pace. Michael kept occasional contact with her, sharing updates, birthday photos, school records, emotional milestones. They never discussed the past again. That part had been buried. The present was being built on what could still be saved. Anchored in a secluded bay in Chile, Michael watched his kids playing in the sand with other traveling children. Beatrice read a book beside him. The northern light rocked gently. And in that moment, he understood the pain that had thrown him into the sea had, unintentionally, led him straight to the life he'd never imagined. A life with truth, connection, and new beginnings. No applause, no revenge. Just the certainty he'd done what was right, even when everything screamed otherwise. Because sometimes, loving means letting go, but also knowing when to return. And at that moment, he was exactly where he was meant to be. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.